many ways. So when we think body, soul, and spirit, I feel like in my work, I often am more of the soul part, that mind, will, and emotions. And we can't ignore that part because sometimes we get so spiritual. We think that we're just going to pray and we're going to trust God.
We're not practical.
And there's nothing wrong. We should be praying and we should be trusting God.
That's exactly right.
But if we don't look at what do I feel and why do I feel this way and how do I learn to express myself, and even if what I'm thinking and feeling isn't pretty, it's not wrong to think it or feel it. I need to let myself think it, feel it, deal with it. So, the counseling portion deals with the soul. And I feel like we can't ignore that, but we also can't ignore the body and the spirit.
Yeah. Now, Nancy's really given herself to understanding the body, particularly when it comes to the body. And Nancy, help us understand the body a little bit more.
Well, in relationship to trauma, we all have some level of trauma. Some people a whole lot more than others in this world. No one gets off free of having some problems as they walk through this life. But with children in particular, it can set them up neurologically because you have something called the vagus nerve, and it comes down. It's the longest nerve in your body, and it starts at your lower brain, and it works its way down. It touches the heart, it touches the lungs, it touches the stomach, the small intestine, the colon, and really other things too, all major organs. But what happens is, let's say you get stressed, and your heartbeat, you're not running, but your heartbeat starts to get a little faster. Maybe you start to sweat. These things are all because of the vagus nerve. Well, it has a big impact on high stress has a big impact on your stomach and your ability to digest. What happens is if you're stressed all the time, your vagus nerve says, "Oh, we can't digest. We've got to get ready to run." Remember fight or flight? I'm sure many of you learned that, fight, flight, or freeze. Well, that is a neurological issue that really has an impact on your digestion, and it's because of the vagus nerve. And so if you are always stressed, you're not going to digest. Basically, the vagus nerve is telling your body, okay, we're going to shut off digestion. We're just going to let it sit in the stomach because we've got to send all this energy, not for digestion, but into the other body parts because we've got to get ready to run or fight or something. And we stay at that level. There is no saber-toothed tiger that is going after these kids or us. But we stay in a seated position as we take a test and we shut down our digestion and we're stressed. And see, that's the thing is daily life in modern society keeps us at a higher level of stress than I think that our grandparents and great-grandparents ever experienced. Stress is needed. It is a positive thing when we need it. But if we're in constant stress, it's going to have a real impact on our gut health. And these children, a lot of these children, I know that Gail has experienced this with foster care. Some of these children really have problems. They can't go to the bathroom properly, constipation, irritable bowel syndrome. You can have a 6-year-old with IBS. And so we really need to start working on the gut. But the big thing is you have to feel safe. If you've been traumatized in early life, you neurologically get set up to always feel fearful. And then you have ADHD-type behaviors. You're always looking at the door. Who's coming in the door? What's going on behind me? I have to listen to everyone's conversation. A lot of that can be because of early stress. You don't feel safe. So the number one thing is, even in the body, is we've got to get these kids to feel safe, which really goes back to the soul and to the spirit. And I do believe in certain dietary things that we can do to help their gut health and such as that, but the three have to be taken on together. Gail, why don't you talk a little bit about that?
Before you get on to that, what comes to gut health, they are treating things like irritable bowel syndrome and things like that with counseling because they're realizing the principle that you're talking about, right?
Yes. And also people with a lot of early childhood trauma and have gut health problems such as IBS, they're much more likely to have depression, anxiety, even later in life, a high trauma in early life makes you much more likely to have dementia in later life or Parkinson's. They're starting to see that this is the entire life cycle is being looked at in regards to poor gut health, but really the poor gut health is often related to stress.
Yeah. I remember talking to Dana a couple of months ago, and I was just mentioning about serotonin flow and so forth, and she was saying, hey, you create more serotonin in your gut than you do in your brain.
95%.
95% of the serotonin flow comes from your gut. And I think that's remarkable, something that we don't think about. Like when we had foster kids in our house, we found certain behaviors, but then when we started making sure they had protein and things as early in the morning, feeding them differently, we saw the behaviors would change a little bit more. Gail, talk about you're going to do the spirit, right?
Sure.
Yeah, talk about that in regards to, and then we're going to bring this a practical way. We're going to tie this all around and talk about the practical ways of ministering or helping your children. Go ahead.
I think we go back to starting with where are we spiritually before we can deal with the spiritual need of our children.
Good.
Definitely we need to make sure that we're surrendered, surrendered our life every day. And so I would recommend praying in the morning when you get up. I'd recommend, choose you this day who you will serve. And it's really not about you. It's about, Lord, how can you use me today? And so
that's very practical, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
How can you use me today?
Inviting God into your day. Yeah.
And then we had talked earlier just even about taking down the promises of God. So if you're struggling with your children and you're seeing things, we're called to call things that are not as though they are. So let's take the promises of God. Let's speak them into the air. God created the world through spoken, and He's given us the authority to do that as well. And so I'm going to speak over my children as well throughout the day. So that's very practical.
It's very important too,
and
right?
It is, because we tend to just address the negative, and so we get in this negative spiral with kids, and then they start acting. They're going to get attention one way or another, especially traumatized children. They're always seeking attention, and so you can either choose to give them positive attention or they're going to get it in a negative way. And so I definitely think speaking, promises over the kids.
That's right.
I really ask the Lord to give me a vision for my children. So I have one son that I feel like he's not real bookish, but he's very mechanical. And the Lord just showed me when he was little. I said, one day you're going to fly airplanes, and you're going to rescue children, and you're going to be in the jungle. And I tell him that every year. and he says, when can I look at the airplanes? Can you buy me that book? And and now he's starting to look at that. But the Lord showed me that's his call for him, and so I'm going to speak it over him. And just realizing that each child has a gift. Each child have a gift. We want to put each one in a box, but God has a specific plan for each child, and He wants to show you. He wants to give you ways to encourage their giftings.
Yeah.
And if a child can do really well in the giftings that they have, they will take on things that are harder for them. And that's oftentimes, they're just not used to succeeding at anything. But if you can have a child do really well in one thing, then they're more likely to work on the things that are harder for them. So, like throughout the day, let's say we're dealing with a child that is fearful, which is often the case. That's I might take a child that's fearful, and we would just pray over the situations. Why are you fearful? We would talk through it. What's going on? Okay, so we're going to pray against the spirit of fear. And we're going to just, because God has not given us a spirit of fear, but of love and power and a sound mind. So knowing your scriptures is helpful there again to speak truth over the situation, because we're in the world we're dealing with right now. Fear is just overtaking the entire world. And so if you think that as healthy adults, or those of us that are adults, are dealing with that ourselves, anxiety and fear right now with what's going on, how much more these children. It makes them very uneasy. We see a lot more mental health stuff going on right now than ever before. And just taking those times to just pray. When a child expresses a memory that they have, a very practical thing that I do spiritually with my children is I will talk to them about the memory. And then I will ask them to reach in and physically pull out that feeling and put it in their hands. So I might say, what do you feel? Is it rejection? Is it disappointment? Is it fear? Is it anger? Whatever they're dealing with. And I'll just tell them, I said, we'll just pray together. And I said, now hand it to Jesus and watch him take it.
So important.
Just give it to him, because a child can remember something, but we know it has a hold on him if it causes them to have the feelings attached to it. So once they've really been able to work through forgiveness, because they have to learn to forgive to be able to be whole.
Yeah. You said a mouthful there. 2 points that I want to hit on. I remember I had some trauma in my childhood, and I remember specifically the events that happened, and I would relive these over and over in my mind, and I was trying to, it was young when I was in ministry, actually, and I remember sitting down in my house and using my imagination, going through that event, and even in my imagination, going back to the place where I was 3 or 4 years old, and imagining and seeing Jesus walk into the room and intervening on my behalf and taking me out of the room.
Absolutely.
And that was a source of healing for me. So when you say, touch your heart and put it in your hand and give it to Jesus, these are practical tools that you're giving to your children so that they can get free in areas that you might think it's silly, but you never know. That could be bringing the power and the healing to their lives. But another thing you said, I think is, and I wish maybe all of you guys could talk on this too, but the importance of speaking good words into chaos. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth was void, dark. I mean, there was chaos, but how did God respond to the chaos? He spoke good words. Let there be light. He saw that it was good. And the good words begin to dissolve the chaos. And when there's chaos or trauma going on, when we start to speak, oh, you're just like your dad, or you start to speak those curse words, it only brings forth more chaos. But when you start to invoke good words, which is, again, how do you know the good words? Reading the good book, knowing the Bible.
Absolutely.
It begins to dispel that. You want to go into that more?
Well, I have one girl that hasn't been with me real long. She's been with me about 9 months, and she tends to really spiral. But when she's in a good place, she is really good. I mean, super good, like super sweet, super helpful, really wants the Lord. And it's kind of like her behavior hasn't caught up to where she is spiritually. And, but I found when she's like that I will say to her, this is not who you are. Mm-hmm. This is not who God changed you to be. That is your old nature, and that is not who you are. And, just speaking that into her life to say, God has something for you. And he has created you to be something special. Mm-hmm. And just speaking that over them in that situation.
And saying that out loud helps you too.
It helps me, because I'm like looking at it going, well, Lord, I'm trusting you, because it's not looking like, right now it's pretty crazy, and we've known crazy. And so it is. It brings you back to the truth yourself.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
That's good.
So in terms of just practical ways that you start healing the brain, I want to go back to that trust-based relational interventions. The number where you start is connection, because so many of these kids are disconnected, and frankly, so many adults are disconnected. We think that people know how to connect if they're adults and they're functioning and they have a job and they go to church, and we have this idea, but not everybody is comfortable with connection.
That's exactly right, yeah.
And if the parent does not know how to connect, it is impossible for them to train the child to connect. So we have to identify what and there's so many, there's a lot of literature out there, but just simply spoken, if we don't know where to start, we start with eye contact. And when I tell a parent, I need you to sit down and look at your child and talk, and they say, ugh, I know, like we've hit on something that's really important. I frequently tell parents to hug their children, and they say, we don't really do that at our house. I'm like, how come? Well, after they got big enough to bathe themselves and go to the bathroom by themselves and do all that, we really don't touch them. We heal by touch. And I feel like there's a lot of stigma there, especially when we have foster kids, because they've also been wounded by touch. So we do have to be cautious. but there's no reason that we can't hold hands or have pats on the back or, side hugs if that's what's appropriate for the age and the stage. And
even starting there, just with a pat on the back, just or touch on the shoulder, or those kind of connections, so good. Or just starting at looking them in the eye and looking them in the face.